Welcome back to the Kouryuu podcast, where we discuss the cultural differences between Japan and Canada. I'm Zach from Canada,
I'm Noah from Japan.
and returning again this week is Ernest Keung.
Hey guys, still here on the second bonus episode where we're continuing our conversation from the first part. So Ernest here, I'm a Canadian living in Japan.
Yeah, just with a lot of these episodes we have with guests, we just have like a really good time talking. So why not do bonus episode? So actually, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Ernest, was like how was the kind of transition between COVID then going into COVID? Like how much did things change in Tokyo?
Sure. I think it was a bit interesting in that sense when the whole world kind of went on lockdown and Japan
Mhm.
kind of had to go on lockdown, but not everything was fully locked down. Like compared to
Mhm.
what I've experienced in Japan versus people back at home or in other parts of the world, it's definitely not as strict here.
Mhm.
Like stores are still open, but they're open for a limited time. Like they shut down earlier, so it's a little bit of
Right.
inconvenient if you're used to the Tokyo that never sleeps, right? Like things are opened until
Mhm.
8 at night. Convenience stores are always
Yeah.
open. Restaurants run late. So that was kind of an interesting transition going from kind of like normal life to all of a sudden things are technically in a state of emergency. And I think people kind of took the first one a lot more seriously. I don't know how things were in Osaka,
Mm.
Nagoya, but at least in Tokyo, people stayed at home. There weren't a lot of people out and about. I mean, I had a friend that was here and he kind of got caught in all of it. Like he was here for vacation and he ended up staying a lot longer because of
Oh,
COVID,
man.
and he didn't want to go back to where he was from because things were kind of worse over there. So, and he liked Japan a lot, so he kind of used it as an excuse.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he and I would kind of just meet up for like evening walks, not in like any big major station. We went to like places like more
Mhm.
local areas, and it was just really nice or interesting to see that kind of different perspective of how like
For
things,
sure.
how quiet things are. But sometimes we ended up passing by like Shibuya, not because we wanted to go there. It's just we were walking in like a certain area. In order for us to get back, we have to go to like a major station like Shinjuku or Shibuya. So we
Right,
end up
right.
going to
Yeah.
Shibuya at 10 o'clock. And, from all the pictures that everyone sees or all the videos that you watch about like Japanese culture in the streets of Shibuya, it's always packed, right? Especially the famous crossing, right? And this was the
Yeah.
first time in my life after still traveling here so many times that the crossing was like practically empty.
Wow.
That was kind of like a bit foreign,
Yeah, that's crazy.
post-apocalyptic experience. Like, wow, 10 p.m. on a Friday night. Shouldn't there be people here? Oh, you can literally see the streets.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of similar here a bit. Like, I would see pictures of like the Eaton Center without any people in it, and like you couldn't even recognize like the floor like patterns because like you just never see them because it's always like
Right.
just swarmed with people. So it was like, yeah, it was definitely very interesting to see here too.
Yeah, that's definitely a good part to compare. Like that crosswalk, Young and Dundas to Shibuya has that
Yeah.
kind of similar experience, right? With like the neon lights, big billboards, signs, the amounts of people, all the shopping, the plazas and everything.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, for now, yeah, for you. So when you went back to Japan, how was Osaka?
When I went back to Japan, actually, I went to, Haneda Airport first,
Mhm.
and then I had
Sure,
to
sure.
have like a 2 weeks quarantine. So,
Oof.
yeah, actually, I had the experience to stay in airport at one night, actually. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and then after that, I moved to hotel. I booked at the airport, and then 2 weeks. And after that, I went back to Osaka, and then it was. I don't really feel like changing, but I stayed,
Mhm.
for almost 2 years in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was kind of like culture shocked.
Sure.
How can I put this? Like when I went to Canada, I was culture shocked. But when I went back to Osaka again, I was like
Mhm.
culture shocked.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I took a train in Osaka, yeah, it was
Mhm.
so like empty, like more empty than like normal. Yeah, I felt like that. So yeah, but now I think people in Osaka, as Ernest like mentioned before, like still restaurant just open like in a short time,
Mhm.
but like I don't really see like a big difference like a
Oh,
mood
hmm.
now. Like people
Oh, sure.
now, like people have to be patient, but now
Mhm.
maybe they want to go outside now. So yeah,
Yeah.
and in Japan, so like there are a bunch of like big malls. So now it's
Mhm. For
closing.
sure.
I think.
Mm.
Yeah, it's in
Oh, okay.
Tokyo too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or was it in Golden
I
Week?
think it's like
I
In Golden
passed by
Week.
like Hibiya and Ginza, and that was kind of another one of those moments where like all the major
oh,
stores
for
were
sure.
closed, and this is
Mm,
Golden Week, like prime shopping time
Right.
during the
mm.
break. Sales happen during this time, and retailers like I guess I don't know if the word forced to close down, but yeah, they were shut down. So it was kind of interesting. You still see people out and about walking in these Ginza and these areas where it's known for shopping, but nothing was opened. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
guess it's just whether it's the government or yeah, I guess you can say I guess it's just the government trying to do what they
Government.
can to kind of control the situation. Because I guess in Japan, I would say at least from what I'm seeing, the data, things aren't really getting better, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
It's nice that in this part of the world and from an Asian culture, mask and sanitation and hygiene has always been
Mm,
top quality
Yeah.
with Japanese, right? So we never had these challenges of people not wearing masks and people not
mm,
social distancing. Although it can be challenging in Japan because in Osaka
Yeah.
and Tokyo, the population density is so high that
mm.
you
Yeah.
go out on a
Yeah.
train, you can't social distance, right? Like you got
Yeah.
people all around you 360, right? But at least Japanese people have always, I think, kept the city very clean. Now
Mm,
you have like sanitizer in every store you go into, and it's widely available for
Mhm.
everyone. So every
mm.
day, if I go to like a supermarket, I can get sanitized right off before
Yeah.
I enter, and then I leave, I
Mhm.
can sanitize again. So that's always kind of provided kind of a comfort and a sense of safety, or
Mm,
more of a bit of
For
layer of
sure.
protection against this pandemic that's happening.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Like that's one thing that's really interesting is that so well like for like right now things in Japan I guess aren't the greatest right now for COVID, but like when you compare Japan to other countries, like it hasn't been nearly as bad because like for just Ontario, I think we still have more cases per day than the entirety of Japan, and we have like less than a tenth of the population.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, and on top of that, Ontario, despite the major cities, the population isn't as dense, right?
Yeah,
mm.
it's like the GTA is pretty dense, and I guess like Ottawa Gatineau area is, but then other than that, like it's not really.
Okay,
Yeah,
dense.
It's not that. Yeah,
Mm,
I guess it is, and I guess one of the reasons is because we just don't have that culture here of wearing masks
mm,
when
mm, mm.
you get sick.
yeah,
So I
that's
feel
what's
like
kind of like, yeah, a bit of a kicker too, because people are in cars too, so there's isolation and separation happening. And
yeah,
from what I heard from friends and my family back home, most people are just going out for grocery shoppings, and most stores have
mhm, yeah,
a social distance process. Like you can't get in the store,
yep,
people are lining up. I don't know if that still exists anymore, and because you know maybe they've changed it or they made it more strict.
mhm,
But at least maybe last year and late last year, I've heard is that if people want to go to Costco, like they're only letting a certain amount of people in the store. You have to kind of wait outside in the cold, and even then, people
yeah,
are kind of spaced between like I guess 6 feet apart is the norm, right? So they actually have like
yeah,
stickers or signs that you have to stand in a
yeah,
circle, like
for
you
sure.
can't get anywhere close to the person in front or behind you, right? So and then from like a square kilometer like distance, the population isn't as dense like as to Tokyo. Like if I were to go to Shibuya now, like there's the
Mhm.
closest person to me would probably be like 2 feet, right? And we're still trying to avoid each
Yeah,
other, but it just happens that the next person is also 2 feet, so like we can't get any more social distance without someone like entering
yeah.
someone's personal space, right? So it's kind of
Mm,
interesting in that sense where how like you mentioned Zach, how different countries are approaching this and
Mhm.
the challenges that they're being
Yeah.
faced, and if anything, there are some of the flaws that are being exposed in certain systems, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, Ernest, do you go to work by train or just you are working from home now?
I'm working from home, so fortunate
Okay.
for me, I've still been working from home, and I've been working from home since the early part of March of last year, 2020. So it's
Oh,
been like a
wow.
year plus for me working
That's
from
really
home.
good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you don't need to experience like so many, like a train, like you have to take a train, like so many
Yeah.
people
It
like.
kind of sucks that
Okay.
people still have to in their normal commute because they're
Mm,
being exposed unnecessarily to risks
Mhm.
that can be really just averted easily, right? Like if the company's not making the staff go into the office, then it's just kind of that minimal risk you don't necessarily need to take, right?
Mhm.
And then on top of
For
that, some
sure.
of us foreigners, how do I put it, may or may not speak full on Japanese, right? And if you've ever gone
Mhm.
through the healthcare system here, it's a different experience. Even if you speak it, you may not necessarily know all the terminology that the doctors are using to
Mhm.
explain, or
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do you explain that you're not feeling well. And I don't mean COVID specifically, right? Because I guess with COVID, you just ask, can I get tested? I don't feel so well. But if you're
Yeah,
feeling
yeah.
like you have more difficult ailments or you're not feeling well in certain areas that you can't really explain to a doctor, then as a foreigner, you may have challenges here, right?
Mhm. For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like even I mean, well, even when you go to the hospital in, I guess, your home country and you're speaking your own native language, for sure, there's still times where the doctor
Yeah.
could tell you something and you might not understand what he's
Yeah,
talking about.
mm.
exactly.
For sure. And
You're
sorry, just I know that this is like completely I guess kind of off topic, but something I was really wondering about. But what was your experience like finding an apartment in Japan?
Mm,
Ah, when I first moved here, I did the share house because
mm,
Oh,
the
okay.
share house was close to the office, and I guess at that
Mhm.
time, that's when I started making a few YouTube videos, and I
mm.
Mhm.
just at that time I didn't have a lot of equipment. I just filmed on my phone, so and the audio wasn't
Sure,
great,
sure.
and I just kind of pieced some short videos, and that's where I kind of explained some of my experiences there. But that was kind of a very simpler time for me because I just had my two luggages and I just lived in a
Mm.
space where they provided you a room and everything. So finding that wasn't difficult. I googled it before I moved here and I found certain companies, but this one in terms of price, the location, and it being close
Mhm.
to the office at that time, I felt it made sense because I didn't necessarily need to do the commute and I can be kind of close to the office to just kind of make things simple as I settle in, right? So I stayed there for
For
about
sure.
4 months. Finding that place wasn't hard, but my experiences
Mhm.
finding a place in Japan was that you needed to find an agent, and they're all over the place.
Mm,
You don't
For sure.
necessarily need to sign with anyone, that you're exclusive with them, at least in my experience. And then
Mhm.
you kind of tell them what you're looking for, which areas that you'd like to see, and then they go through the database, which is available across all the real estate. I guess you call it the fudosans in Japan, right?
mm.
The people that help you find places, whether you're buying, you're
Sure,
selling,
sure,
or
sure.
you're renting. It's the same database that they're searching. It's like the Google for places to live in, or available
Sure.
apartments, right? They go for the system. So whether you go with this company or this company, more or less you'll get kind of
Mhm.
the same inventory or availability, right? And then you tell them
Mhm.
which units you like to see, and then they'll call up the landlord or the company responsible for filling the occupancy for this place, and the real estate agent will kind of explain the situation. I have a client here that's so and so. They'll mention your nationality and your status and things like that. They're a foreign worker and things like that. And that's where I kind of wouldn't say I saw
Mhm.
challenges, but that's where I'm sure people have heard that there are certain
Yeah,
restrictions or challenges for foreigners
for
to
sure.
rent in here, and that is still prevalent in what I've seen. Right. So if, for
Yeah.
example, what I mean here is that if there was, let's say, on a given day, I was going to see 10 units, and that's quite busy, right? Like, the agent has to take you to 10
Yeah,
places in
that's a
one day.
lot, yeah.
That's a lot. It's fun, but at the same time, by the fifth unit, you're done. You're pretty much done, right? But it's fun as a foreigner
Yeah.
moving to Japan. It's a really exciting experience because you get to see places. You get to imagine,
Mhm.
like, hey, this may be an apartment I'd be living in, right? Um, so where I was getting at with the whole foreigner experience is that, so they'll call up this landlord and then they'll tell you that this person is a foreigner, his nationality is
Mhm.
Canadian, and then at that point, from that time, you will hear whether or not you are accepted to see the place or not. Not rented or not, just even
Yep.
granted to see the place. So
Yeah,
because
yeah.
if say you're a foreigner and this landlord doesn't really want to, let's say deal with foreigners, because I guess one of the problems that people have had in the past is that, Japan is very rule-based society. There's a lot of unity. It's a lot of self-preservation, a lot of self-sacrifice for the greater good, right? And, kind of exaggeration, but you tend to can't just do freely what you want to do, like in a Western world, right? Like, for example, what I mean here is your garbage disposal, your recycling, it's all done in specific days of the week, right? And it's all split. Plastic goes here, glasses go here. Like, you can't just put a bag down and say, hey, today's recycling, so I'm going to recycle this whole thing, and someone's it's not done that way, right? So I guess landlords and Japanese people have had some problems with foreigners who don't necessarily always follow the rules, right? Give or take. Some of them are ridiculous, but so there is a chance that you may not be able to see certain units that you're interested at the beginning. But once you are able to see a unit, it's pretty much up for grabs. And my experience with it is that the real estate agent, it might be a sales tactic, but it's not high pressure or anything, but they do recommend that if you like a unit, especially in a city like Tokyo, then you probably should make the decision on the spot or on the day of, because chances are if you see a place, let's say on Saturday, and you need kind of the night to sleep on it and make the decision on Sunday, it's probably gone. So I think one of the first days I was looking at units, and maybe in Zach in Canada, our experiences, if you're moving to places or you're considering renting a different place, you feel like you have a little bit more time, right? You can.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on where, but
Sure.
because like Toronto's also pretty crazy.
Sure, there's
but that
demand
might just be a Toronto thing.
No doubt. But Tokyo, it's like, the real estate is pretty much saying, like, if you like this place, you probably should make an offer now, because I was saying, like, one of the first days when I went to see units, I saw 5 or 6 on one day, and then we didn't make any decisions, and I wasn't really fully sold on all the places. And then by the next time I saw the agents next week, the real estate agent next week, he said, oh yeah, by the way, all the places that you saw last week, they're all gone. But he told me that by Sunday it was gone. It wasn't like from Saturday to Saturday it was gone. He just told me by the next Sunday afternoon the last unit was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So the current place I'm living in, if it helps listeners about experience finding an apartment, is I saw this place that I'm currently in right now, and I made the decision on the spot because I knew that if I didn't, it was going to be probably gone by the next day. And I actually had my eye on this particular unit. It's nothing special or anything. It's just the location was where I wanted it to be. The size was good. The layout was decent. And we had our eye on it for some time, but the previous person that was living here hadn't moved yet, but it was already on the market. So it was kind of like you can see it online, but you can't see the place yet, but you want it. So it's kind of like, oh, it's available now. The agent contacted us, and I was like, let's do it tonight. I'll take me to the place. I want to see it. That's how I'm here now. Long story short.
Sure. And did you find that was the same across Tokyo, or did you find that as like mostly in the more popular areas?
I mean, I've only lived in Tokyo so far, but I can probably imagine it being very similar, like it being, especially Tokyo being the capital, and most of the population density is here, if not in Aichi or in Kansai, right? That the demand for places is quite big in Tokyo. I think here, as someone that's lived in Toronto, I find the rent here to be reasonable, but as locals and Japanese mention, the rent in Tokyo is quite ridiculous. Right? Like what you're paying for something in Tokyo, you could still get in Osaka for like half the price and more of the space.
Yeah. I think it depends on the place actually. And then, like Ernest, did you when you went to Japan, like you were sharing the house with someone else?
Yeah, I stayed at a share house initially because I wasn't in the country yet, so it didn't make sense to kind of find a place or try to contact the real estate. I didn't have any contacts at that time, so it just didn't seem like a good idea, like to contact a foreign company to help you. And I find that if you're not trying to do this from a Japanese, how do I put it? Take the Japanese route to do it with an agency that speaks Japanese, and they can get you the access through more places. Then I think you're only limited to what a foreign real estate agent can help foreigners. So the units might not be as widely available. They might not be to what you're looking for, or really it's just the inventory for foreigners isn't that great from what I hear too, right? Because I've had some colleagues who have had to go with a foreign company to look because they and their spouse couldn't speak the local language, so they had to go with a foreign company to help them, and they were happy with their place, but they found some struggles with it. Like that person actually went on the Japanese site and looked for inventory and actually showed it to the foreign agency. Yo, can you get me this, because what you're giving me isn't helping me, right? And then I think they were able to get some access to some, but it was still, there's still
hard,
challenges at hand.
Interesting. So is there any kinds of like website to find like especially like a sharing house in Japan, like for foreigners?
Yeah, I think I simply did some Google searches, but interestingly enough, if you speak Japanese to the listeners, try doing both because you get a very different experience. So I did searches in English, and I got a lot of sites and communities or networks that were obviously catered to foreigners. Like if you're looking for a share house, cheap, low, simple, move in now type of style, right? And I actually noticed the price was actually a little bit more from certain areas, like the popular places. Like if you're a foreigner, you want to live in Shinjuku or close to Sumida or in Asakusa. Or Shibuya type of places, then the rent was actually higher in a share house in those areas. And then when I searched in Japanese, I got searches that were catered to really more people that can speak Japanese that were looking for affordable housing or shared housing. And I think at that time, the place I found, I was paying $600 Canadian a month for a room, which was like my cost of living was actually much cheaper than I was in Toronto. So that's why when I mentioned earlier, like that was actually a simpler time for me because my rent was cheaper. I owned less things. I had like less problems, I felt. Well, maybe happier. You're in a foreign country. You're just living in a room, and the share house I stayed in was with, as crazy as it sounds now, was with 12 other people. So including myself, 12 people. So 6 people on one floor, 6 people on another floor. We all each had our own room, multiple toilets, multiple showers, 2 kitchens. We didn't have the shared common area like some other share houses, which I think may or may be a very different experience. So if you're looking for privacy, if you're first moving to Japan, or you're looking for a place for a longer stay, then maybe a share house where you just have a room to yourself and you just kind of want to go in and out. You're not here to meet people or interact, and sure. But I've also had some share house mates that lived there. They actually wanted that common shared space to hang out and just chill, because some of the people I met were actually English teachers there. So they definitely had a different experience than I did, because they didn't really speak the language. They had to kind of fend for themselves in some sense, because, they would kind of try to cook, but what happens is like your roommate or your housemate is cooking at 10 p.m. and you wanted to cook at the time, and they're not done until 11 p.m. So now you have to cook at 11 p.m. So you have to kind of deal with that, right? And if luckily I was in the room that was furthest from the kitchen, so I didn't have to kind of deal with the cooking smells that were left behind, the odor. They're not that it smelled bad, but like, this is the reason why we have kitchens separated from a bedroom, right? So you don't have that lingering after smell, right? But sometimes that was there. The oils, the scents, the spices were left behind, right? So one of those things you have to kind of deal with. But overall, I'd say my experience staying at a share house was quite positive, and I would have stayed there longer. But at that time, it was just time to move out for me.
Ernest, do you think sharing the house is like a more common way to live in Japan, like compared to Toronto? Like when I went to Toronto, I could find easily, sharing a house actually. So
you couldn't find easily, right? Is what you're saying?
In my case, luckily I could.
Actually,
I could find it. Yeah. But what about like in Tokyo? Like,
because I've never had to look for a share house, and I'm sure Zach can also speak to this.
Same for me.
I didn't know how easy it was, but my experience of meeting Japanese friends, they would always end up staying in like an Italian person's basement, or a Filipino was very common. Filipino basement.
For sure.
So I guess that level of share house was always available, but my perception of a share house was always like I don't want to say terrace house, but that was kind of my perception of it. Like you would stay in a unit with other people, and you'd have your own kind of private space, but no one was kind of the owner. It's just everyone else is there as a share house. So, and with the population size and the function of how Tokyo functions, I think finding share house or the concept of share house is a lot more common, at least in my experience. Maybe because I was more exposed to it because I had to find it. But in Toronto, I just wasn't aware of it, right? Because I lived there. Hey, I was native there. I grew up there, so that concept of is share house experience different? I think yes, it is, but I never considered or was conscious about it in Canada.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Because it's same as me. Like I'm native, Japanese person, so I didn't, I haven't, never, trying to find sharing a house. Like so, yeah.
Don't need that experience. But I do think it's quite common and easy in Tokyo for viewers listening. I mean, there's so much
for sure.
companies helping people, and it's not just like foreigners that are coming here to like work from like a Western society. Since I moved here, you actually have a lot of people from Southeast Asia in Japan working too. So it isn't like your typical British person or American person or European coming to Japan because they want to have the Japanese experience. It's really a lot of people from India, from Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, just coming here because the opportunity is better for them that I've met.
Interesting. Okay.
If that shares some light or some insights for listeners. I mean, that was a bit of a new thing for me because I always just assumed there was always people that were coming from like English speaking societies that were
for sure.
But that's not the case. Once you live here, you see a more localized version of the walks of life here.
Yeah, it's really cool because like I said, I guess for sure it's just different when you're from the place because like usually you don't end up in those situations. Like just speaking in I guess kind of North America in general maybe, but usually people don't live with like strangers unless it's like maybe like get a roommate just because it's cheaper, but usually it's just like maybe one or two people.
Right.
I feel like most of the time, usually not like 12.
Yeah, that's so true. And like if you don't really think about it, but yeah, like you'd have a roommate or two, maybe 4 at max, including you, to really like cut down costs. And if you have like a very big house, or you do it back in the day, you're in school, right? If you were studying abroad, you would just get together with your schoolmates and you just rent this house off campus or close by. And, just to you're only there temporarily, right? You don't think about it too much, but I think the concept of a share house was new to me because I never lived with roommates myself. I lived in Canada, I studied locally and all that, so I never had roommates or needed roommates for better or worse in that experience. And I'm also an only child, so just the concept of having to share stuff is still a little bit more foreign to me, but I try to be considerate. With the share house experience itself, it is definitely something new for me because it was like having roommates and having share housemates at the same time. Yes, this is turning into like the experience of living in Japan episode, right? Not the work.
Like, Alice, do you think do you want to live like in another area, like except Tokyo, like for example, like a countryside or like in Osaka, anywhere like in Japan? What do you think?
Yeah, very interesting question. I mean, for me, I do see myself staying in Japan longer term, and it would be nice that I can experience living in the rural area sometime. I mean, maybe not right now because I like the convenience and the excitement of Tokyo. So for me to move outside to like not even like the nearby prefectures. I'm not even thinking like Kanagawa or Saitama because those are more family areas where you live out there, you raise kids, but still be close and have access to the city. But I'm talking about like, a couple prefectures out, right? Maybe like Shizuoka or Nagano, where they're more rural. I mean, I definitely want to experience that part of it, but maybe not in my current life phase right now. I mean, I really like staying in Tokyo, and that's kind of why I wanted to move to Japan anyways, was to experience the city. In terms of other cities that I want to live in, there's like maybe like Sendai or Fukuoka. Those are cities I visited that I really like. So, maybe not for long term, but maybe if I was like assigned there for like a month or two to just kind of stay there for a longer term just to experience the pace and local life there, because I know it's definitely different, the pace of life, the culture of the people, how they approach things. It's definitely different from the big city, because everything here is just so fast paced, and people are a bit more, not cold in a bad way. It's just, how things are in any major city like New York, Paris, London. It's just people are busy and they have places to go. And when you go to a smaller city, usually the pace of life is quite different. Like Toronto versus, the east part of it, or Toronto even versus Vancouver is quite different. Like Vancouver, big city, but the pace of life has a very West Coast feel to it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Like how long can you stay in, like actually in Japan?
Well, I'm on a work visa, and you have the option of the 3 or 5 year one. I got the 5 year one right from the start, so I think as long as I stay with the current company and they renew it, then I can obtain another visa and so forth until they decide to kick me out of the country. So I think it's just to your question, Noya. It just depends on your visa status.
Okay.
If
That's a part
you're
of it
tied
too,
to
for
a
sure.
work permit with the company, or you have the work permit, sorry, the work visa, then and I think there's other visas available, like a spousal visa, or the special humanities skill one, where you hold the PR level. You have certain points because you're contributing, or your skill set, or you went to a certain school, or you have JLPT. That's all rated in the system that I was speaking to another friend on, because he's going through the process of going through that to get his PR too. So then that kind of changes too. So there's different ways to stay longer in the country. It all just ends up being tied to, I guess, what you can offer to the country you're staying in as a social worker or as a worker, right?
Okay,
for sure.
Like, actually, do you want to get PR or something? Like for now, like, what do you think for now?
I think eventually, if I stay longer, it's something I should definitely consider. It doesn't really change too much of what I'm currently doing right now, but from what I understand, the process for us foreigners is that if you go through that kind of special application where they kind of grade you from a score base, right? Like, whether your proficiency level, where you went to school academically, what you're doing in your career, your salary base, things like that, you can fast track it and actually get PR much sooner, within like a year or so. But I think the normal process is you actually need to live in Japan for like 10 years to get it. And, for listeners out there, I mean, if I'm wrong, I apologize. I don't have 100% all the details. This is just information I've learned through speaking with colleagues and friends that have lived here longer than I have, and those that are going through their own processes right now, and those who have PR. So they've kind of shared their experience. Again, I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but when I heard like about the 10 years part, unless that's changed on the time of this recording, is actually surprisingly quite long, because from friends that I knew that came to Canada, they didn't come as like an immigrant or they got naturalized later on. Their process was not
like 2 or
as
3
long,
years,
right? Like they worked a
I
few
think
years,
so. Yeah.
or they studied, and then they contributed.
Exactly.
They paid taxes, and then they got a chance to get PR. But here in Japan, it's like, we need you to do 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
I guess kind of going off what we were saying before, I guess maybe over time they'll kind of lower the requirement from 10 years, since that is
maybe
quite long.
Or they encourage you to do the special application where they, the point system, right, where they grade you on your all the criteria I mentioned earlier, right? And you can fast track it within a year or two. I don't have JLPT, and I don't think my current work is that high graded in like a very specialized or technical field, right? So probably it doesn't make sense to go through the process for me, because I already can tell my point system isn't going to be as high as someone who has all their ducks lined up, right? It's like trying to apply for your master's, but you don't have your letters of recommendation, you don't have your GMAT, right? You're applying already, right? So it's like, maybe you should probably line up, get the process done to make things smoother, right? Because I think it does take time and money.
For sure.
Like as you mentioned before, like you have to do for 10 years to get a permanent residency. So like, do you think like Japanese community, not Japanese community, like Japanese social is like Japanese society is exclusive or inclusive? What do you think? Like when you talk to Japanese people, or Like when you go to like a city hall, is it easy to like deal with any processes? What about like what do you think?
Good questions. Multiple layers. I think the whole application process is definitely speaks to the society being very homogenous, and I understand where Japanese Japanese society comes from because you guys have a very long traditional culture and history, right? And you've gone through some changes, some Western influence from the States, and it's changed things quite a bit. But you are still sticking to certain ways of doing things, right? So I think Japan, although things are changing, it's still going to be a very homogenous society. And I think the process of PR speaks to it, right? You know, you need to kind of devote and invest 10 years of your life, a decade here, or you can acquire your PR or change your status, right? So that speaks to it. The second parts to your question, I think from my experience of, you know, whether society is inclusive or exclusive, I think it depends on the people you speak with. I think most of the people we met at Language Exchange, Zach, are probably paint a different picture because they're coming from Japan and they want to experience the local culture of the places they're going to, whether it's Canada or England
like
or other
Australia,
places.
UK,
So they're definitely open to speaking English, meeting foreign friends, and things like that. And then when you finally live in Japan, you also meet the complete opposite of certain people where they really like Japan. They don't really see any need or drive to leave this country, and they just want to stay here. So for them, they're not necessarily the most interested in conversing with foreigners, and you know, they like kind of staying with their own local group, you know, the local dialect. They operate in Japanese, so life's good. There's no need to kind of venture outside of that. Now the next part of it was about going to like the ward offices or government buildings. I've never really had any issues with that itself. I think every time I've gone there, they've always been very helpful. Like they know you're a foreigner, they know you have to go through the Japanese forms, the Japanese bureaucracy, the process. And it's always like, you know, grab a number, go to this counter. Oh, no, not that counter. You got to go to that one, or that one's specific for this. For this chapter. They have counters for like every, from like, you know, whether you're changing your address, you're changing your marriage status, or you're getting a divorce. There's like specific counters for that, or something related to your healthcare or your tax. It's there, but they've always been very helpful. But I guess I'm also living in a place where more foreigners are here too, so maybe they are more, how do I put it, catered or built towards that, right? Like I think some of my friends who I spoke to, or some colleagues, they don't necessarily speak as much Japanese. They end up going to like the government building for help or to update something. They usually just ask, can I speak to the English person, and then the English translator just comes out and helps you. So there's that too, right? Like it's built around helping people who don't necessarily speak the language that are here as a foreigner, right? I think it helps over time if you can just speak Japanese. I think some of the friends I've made in Japan, whether it was outside of Japan from language exchange or here, it really helps if you can speak the languages. I think one thing that I've always admired or really enjoyed about learning the language is that Japanese people are very happy that you want to learn their language. They're very open to it. Right? I've never met someone that like they may ask you why you want to learn Japanese because it's only spoken in Japan. They're very happy that you want to learn the language. Like they take interest in that, right? And I think being able to speak Japanese, if you meet Japanese people, they're more open to kind of, you know, that saying when you're learning languages from, I think the book was saying that, you know, if you speak another language, you are actually talking to that person, right, in their language, right? And another saying was what, speak another language, live another life, right?
Right. Yeah.
For sure. I also think that I kind of speak to that a little more. I also feel like even if your Japanese isn't the best, I feel like they don't really mind. Like, I've really heard there are some places where, like, if you don't speak fluently, they would prefer you just speak English.
Yeah,
But
that's definitely the case in my experience. That's why, Japanese is definitely such a friendly language, Zach. In my
I
experiences
think so.
because I also tried to learn Mandarin, and my experiences with that is quite different. When you go to these language exchanges, it's quite different. You meet native speakers, and more or less they kind of wonder like, wait, why do you want to learn Mandarin when you already speak English? And because they speak English, they are more, they actually feel less, how do I put it, obligated or less driven to kind of, or motivated to really speak in Mandarin to converse with you. They just end up speaking English with you. And I know we're on a podcast, but my background is I'm Chinese Canadian, so they also actually adds another layer because they look at you and wait, you're Chinese, but you're grew up in Canada, so why do you want to learn Chinese if you already live here? So it's like adding that extra layer of like, huh. It's a very different experience of learning Japanese versus learning Chinese.
Sure.
But do you know some like actually kanji, like like when you lived in Canada, like did you learn some Chinese characters like by yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean it's interesting. So because I grew up in Canada most of my life, I wasn't born in Canada. I didn't actually know Chinese or know how to read a lot of characters. So you can say that I didn't know how to read my own language, but I spoke it at home growing up with my family, right? Like most immigrant families, right? Like
it's pretty common. Yeah.
Whether you're Indian or Canadian, Italian Canadian, or you speak your dialect, or my Jewish friends, they would speak Hebrew with their family or Russian, and then they speak English outside, right? So it's common. But for me, it's interesting because I actually learned how to read Chinese because I was learning Japanese. But when I started, I refused to learn kanji at that time because I was just being stubborn and silly. I thought I just want the language, right? And I told myself, well, I can't even read Chinese. Why would I devote the time and effort and all this energy to learn a language? And at that time, kanji was very complex because in Chinese, as a Chinese speaker, more or less we have one pronunciation in our characters, right? It's usually the onyomi, right? Because it's borrowed from Chinese, right? If you're learning, for listeners learning kanji or studying Japanese, but in Japanese they have the kunyomi and onyomi, so the Japanese pronunciation and a borrowed Chinese pronunciation. And then when you see a full-on sentence, if you're new to the language, you don't know if something should be read as the onyomi or the kunyomi. And that was already challenging enough. So I was like, I'm definitely not going to be able to learn this. But after I finished Japanese courses at a college, I was taking part-time. I wanted to take my Japanese a little bit further, and I felt like I wasn't able to really know a lot from these courses. I finished the program. I should be able to speak a lot better, but I wasn't. So I realized next thing I could do is probably try to take the exams or study towards them, right? And I realized, well, you have to learn how to read kanji. You just can't avoid it. It's just one of those things, right? If you want to be proficient with the language or have some level of fluency, there's no going around it. So at that time, I focused more of my efforts on learning kanji from 50 characters up to 1,500. And then at that time, simultaneously, I was also learning the Chinese pronunciation of them because I figured okay, I might as well just do this in one shot.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So to answer your question, now I can read Chinese characters because I had to learn it through kanji. If you ask me, maybe I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, no, I couldn't.
That's I think that's a really common thing when people learn Japanese is that they just don't want to learn kanji because it is a pretty kind of big hurdle, but for reading it's one of my weaker parts of Japanese. But even from the little I know from kanji, now when I read something in Japanese, if it's only written in hiragana, it's actually more difficult. So it really does suck at the beginning, but once you start to learn some, it actually makes it a lot easier to read.
Exactly.
It just kind of compounds.
Exactly. So I'm glad Japanese did stick to that writing system, and they borrowed from the Chinese loan words and the kanji and the structure of that, because like you said, Zach, to your point, it really does make a big difference. When you're first starting to learn it, you're wondering, why can't everything just be written in hiragana? It's so easy, right?
Exactly.
But man, when you have to read a lot of context, kanji speeds things up so much because you can quickly just scheme over a sentence, and you can kind of get where the vocabulary is, where the loan words are from katakana, and you can get where the grammar is because of hiragana, right? Because hiragana is used more, to derive the grammar, to kind of show the kunyomi from something. So at the end, if it's something like you're reading taberu or tabemasu, it's supposed to be read that way, right? Because it's not all kanji, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And, the other thing too is that a lot of the time, of course it's good to know the pronunciations, but since there are so many kanji, you're gonna kind of forget. But as long as you can recognize the kanji and the meaning, even if you don't remember the pronunciation, you can still probably guess what the word is supposed to mean. So it's really just I guess another way that kanji is really important to learn Japanese, if it is.
Yeah. there is like
Have a thing.
I don't know if you want to call it a mnemonic system built in, but there are ways that the strokes do make sense that represent certain things, right? The 3 dots means it's related to water, right? Liquid,
Mhm.
things like that, right? And
Right.
if
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's the character for like wood, then it's related to an object or something encased in wood, right? So there are patterns that are written. It's not just a random bunch of strokes where you
Yeah.
memorize like 2,000 of these. It's like if you learn the base 500, that 500 can actually make the next 500 much easier, right? And then it gets to the point where you
Absolutely.
hit
Yeah.
diminishing return where none of it makes sense by 2,000, right? Or like JLPT1, right? Some of the kanji I look at, I was like, oh man, like there's no ROI in this, right? Because you can
Yeah.
study all this kanji and just to pass the exam, probably never use this kanji because like
Yeah.
I speak to like some Japanese friends and they look at it, it's like, yeah, man, I don't even know how to read that kanji.
Yeah.
This is like a native speaker, right?
Yeah, I remember someone was telling me that like in Japan, like there's like even for Japanese, there's like certifications you could get for knowing how to read
Yeah.
a bunch of kanji, but like there's not really any point in getting it. It's just, I guess, to say that you know
Bragging,
a lot
right?
of kanji. Yeah, exactly.
Flexing, yeah. I mean, if you're like in like literature or ancient, how characters transitioned into modern Japanese and you need to know like 4,000 of them, then sure, I mean, there's that flex. But I think if you're studying something like kanji and what your language goal is, you should probably focus on the effectiveness of the language. So what I mean by this is that if you're the type where you just want to be in a conversational level, where just hang out with your Japanese friends, when you're on vacation, be able to order food, then you probably just need to know about maybe 1,500 kanji. Even maybe that might be too much. Maybe your level is just at 1,000, right? It doesn't make sense to know all the kanji, right? Just know enough to
Yeah,
do what you need to do, right? It's that part of
exactly.
learning what's effective for the language, right? Like when you first studied, I mean, when I knew how to like approach a language in the beginning, I was like learning all these obscured words that I thought would make my
Right.
proficiency
Yeah.
better. But then I
For
realized like,
sure. For sure.
this whole, hour while we're speaking on the second episode, we've probably only used words in the English language that were like common in like 800 level, right? The 800 most common words. Even by then,
Yeah, for sure.
you
Yeah,
only need 800 words to be able to converse, right? In a daily conversation,
absolutely.
casual
Right.
conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like that's one of the things that when you're learning a language, you kind of, when you start to use the same words frequently, it can feel like you just have a really little bit of vocabulary. But like, there's just some words in a language that you're just going to use all the time. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you use a phrase like really commonly, because it could still sound pretty native,
Exactly.
I think.
Yeah. I've met like some friends where they never study Japanese, but man, they can really hold a casual conversation no problem. They're always like either the loudest in the conversation, like they're always the more outspoken person, driving the conversation. And then you realize they haven't really said anything that's overly complicated. They just know how to speak, right? Like those are the type of people that they're the types that can just present with limited information, right?
Yeah, I guess there is an element to that too,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, for you, are there any words that you feel like you use too much in English?
Oh, in English, okay.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot. Like, I think, yeah, when I learned English, I'm still learning English, and then I realized that I always use have, have, get, go,
Sure,
and
sure.
then like, like after some like this kind of like verbs, like there are so many like prepositions,
Yeah, for
that
sure.
I can
Yeah,
put, and then
yeah,
like like depending on the preposition, it each means different, right? Like,
yeah.
for example, going through is like actually, what does it mean? Like going through, like how can you put this? How can you use this? Like going through.
I guess there's kind of two different meanings. There's like a literal meaning, so you could say like you're going through a tunnel, for example. But then like you could use it in the figurative sense, because you could say like you're going through a hard time. Yeah,
Going through a
Okay.
process.
process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Going through the
Ah,
process
okay,
of
okay.
studying kanji. Yeah. So it's not like
exactly,
you're doing
exactly.
anything
Yeah,
literally, but you are going through I guess, a systematic
like
way of learning
exactly.
something,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, like that. I think, yeah, like when I try to like pass the exam in Japan, like to
Mhm.
enroll university or something, I had
Yeah.
to memorize so many, different verbs. And then, but like, for example, when I learn like a participating,
Mm.
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
you can like replace some words like I think which means like to join, right? To casually to join, but
Join, take part
join,
in.
take part
Yeah.
in, like, yeah. But
Mhm.
when I if I know taking part in, I don't need to
Mhm.
use participate in,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of things. There are so many that kind of thing in English. So
Yeah, for
Mm.
sure.
yeah.
Kind of interesting
Like
that Noya pointed that, because I feel like in English you have more words to describe something similar, whereas in Japanese you have one word to describe multiple things. So when I hear like the word participate, join into partake, it's sanka, right?
Yeah, sanka,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that means all of it. But in English you have 3 words or 4 words to
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it's so true. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess just another one, like, for example, like, miru can mean, like, see, it can mean watch,
view,
Yeah,
stare, like, there's so
there.
many.
yeah,
So many
But,
things.
like, those are all different words in
exactly.
English.
Anything, like, I
Mm.
think you can, if you study like this a language itself, not to learn it, but the difference of it. I think I came across this report from, like, I think it was from York. Someone wrote this, like, the difference of it was that Japanese, you actually say less but communicate more in that sense, right? Because you're dropping like the pronouns. Like, you don't say I'm going to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
store,
yeah.
I'm gonna buy eggs and milk, I'm gonna check out if
Mhm.
there's steak on sale. In Japanese, you only say it once, right? Like, whether you say boku or wadashi, and then from then you just say the things you're gonna buy and you move on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And it's really prevalent in the language. Like, another example is like what the word takai. It means tall, high,
Mm.
expensive.
Yeah.
And those
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah.
of different in some sense, right? Right.
Mm.
Mhm.
So, if I was just randomly, if I was hanging with like you guys and we were in like, in the city, and we're like, well, that building's like takai. So you're almost like thinking, wait, is he saying the building is tall or is the building expensive, right? I mean, it's more
Yeah.
likely the context is tall, right? But, if I'm
Yeah.
talking about the sky tree, then it's probably also expensive, right?
For sure, yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, yeah, I was looking at, I saw this kind of article where is like kind of like ranking like contextuality, I guess, of languages, and like Japan is like way higher on like how
Mm.
context heavy it is versus English, where like I feel like we have to explain things way more, well, I guess in more words compared to Japanese, like you were saying.
Yeah, like that. I think, yeah, when I try to come up with like sentences in English, and then I had to like think about Japanese, how I can
Hmm.
say in Japanese, and then when I try to construct it, it's
Hmm.
so hard. Like, you know, like
Yeah,
English is very, I think, simple. I think more simple than Japanese. I think
in
Japanese
some
has
ways.
in some place like Japanese, for example, Japanese has like some different levels of like respectfulness, like a
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
keigo,
yeah,
Formality
that
of the
part's
language.
yeah.
yeah,
And
part's way
then,
simpler. Yeah.
yeah, like when I learned English, like how to be polite, more polite, I
Hmm.
learned like, for example, could you
Mm.
is
Hmm.
more like polite than can you. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
I
I
think
feel
so.
like with
Yeah.
English, it's just
Yeah.
it's like in English, like they kind of blend together because like when you ask like is could you more formal and can you, like for me when I think of them, like they're so close they
Yeah.
almost might as well be the same.
They're both
Okay,
quite polite,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Mm, do you guys like separate? Like, for example, when you go to like when you're in the office and then when you talk to your boss, like do you use
Mhm.
could you or like would you or like more
um
polite way?
I feel like the biggest difference in English is like when you're talking to, like, say your coworker versus your boss, like with your coworker, it's probably more like you're gonna use like more slang, probably. Whereas when you're talking to your boss, you're probably not gonna do that unless it's like, I don't know, kind of neutral slang. Like, is like here, if you're talking about like loonies and toonies, your boss isn't gonna get mad at you for saying that.
And it also maybe depends on the working environment. If it's a more modern company where the workforce tends to average on the younger side, then
that's true.
More like
that's
I worked at
part
an
of it too.
agency where I was quite casual with my boss at that time. Like I didn't really have to speak with him differently than I spoke with colleagues. You know, he would make jokes and rag on me too, and I get to rag on him too. So it's kind of an interesting working relationship with you have someone where it's more informal.
I just in general, I think it's more informal.
What Noya's asking, I think in the past when I worked in Canada, there were certain words I would say that would be a little bit more polite and more like friendly in a business setting. So I think when someone came to the office to drop something off, or someone dropped off a file, or you have a customer, you don't necessarily some guy came into to the store. You would say like a gentleman had come by earlier to drop off a package, or a customer had come by and was asking for this, right? Like you would use kaksan, like that type of words to make something a little bit more softer, but you rarely would hear someone say, "Oh, some guy came to the store, man." Like you might tell a colleague that, but you rarely would like,
I feel like also too, like for example, like if you said like thanks to your boss instead of thank you, it's kind of worse, but I feel like you don't have to like stress about it too much. Whereas in Japanese, I don't think you would like if you said azas to your boss, I feel like it would be pretty bad, right?
Even I think in the workforce, right? Yeah, like even in my experience, I wouldn't say asas to colleagues that I speak like pretty casually to, right? So, right. The whole arigato gozaimasu, right? So, but for sure, the language formality is also another layer of challenge in this language, because in English it just doesn't have that level of complexity, right? It soften things with could you, would you mind helping me, like that even is more polite than could you, right? Because you're asking someone, I'm inconveniencing you, but can you, right? So that already doesn't, it changes some of the words you use. But what's interesting, what I find in Japanese, is that you have different verbs for different levels of politeness. If you ask someone if you know something, shitemasu ka or shiruka, that's already a level of difference in politeness, right? And then you ask gozonji desu ka, right? Like that's like it's a new entire word, right? If you didn't know gozonji, you're just like, what does that mean? Right? The kanji is different too, by the way, right?
Even in like an introduction, I think we have a lot of ways to say, like watashi wa, for example, watashi wa Naoya desu is like most simple way to introduce, but watashi wa Naoya to moushimasu is most polite way, I think. So
that's like the difference of what saying I am Naoya and I am called Naoya, right? And I guess in English that would just be the difference of my name is this and I am this, right? To be more polite, right? But it's unnatural to call yourself I am called name, right? Because that sounds so third person, right?
Like the only kind of parallels would be like, like when I could say like, my name is Zachary, but you could call me Zach. That'd be like the closest thing, I guess. But I guess like even in Japanese, like I guess you don't really even use like nicknames in the office, I would assume, right? It's always like nani san, right?
Traditional, for sure,
last name with san, it's traditional way, we don't say like Suzuki kun or something for my boss or something. It's rude. So and also we don't really say the subject in all in all the sentences. In English, you guys have to have to put the main subject all the time, maybe.
Usually.
And that can
So
sometimes be confusing for like English speakers learning Japanese, I find, because you don't know if like, wait, is he talking about himself now or talking about me, right? Like, did I miss the topic marker like 3 sentences back, right? Because sometimes like they're talking about other stuff, and then it's like they're asking, oh wait, you're asking me.
yeah.
At least in English, I feel like maybe because we're native speakers, so that never comes across as a problem. But at least I find that if you're always saying I'm going to, you use the subject, you know what's being referred to all the time. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just the nuances of the language, right? Languages.
Yeah. I guess another thing is like for the most part you don't really say you. Usually you just say the person's actual name. Whereas in English, we can say you, and sometimes it can be confusing because if you're like in a group of people. Whereas like if you're with your friends now, yeah, like you probably don't use like anata,
Anata, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Probably just say their name.
Yeah, we don't say anata. We just say the name, that I
Yeah.
want to talk to. But
Mhm.
like anata is only, I think, in a book, not book, like in the lyrics of the song
Yeah.
in Japan,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Anata or kimi,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess
Yeah.
Kimi would be kind of
always
weird too.
kimi is used in the lyrics in Japan. So yeah, we don't use anata and kimi. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually don't
Mm.
hear anata much living here. Like it's never really used in context or spoken, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
When I use it to make sure I'm not confusing the topic or the subject, even I feel kind of weird saying like I have to like confirm that anata ni something something, right? Like I'm doing this for you, and then it just sounds unnatural when I say it, right?
Yeah.
Or it's actually there's something I was wondering about. So for sure, for casual Japanese, like the textbook is definitely totally different. But for Keigo, did you find the textbook? I guess Keigo is similar to how it's actually spoken.
Oh man, that's a tough one because when I finished that college course, we did dabble a little bit on Keigo just because like as an introduction, high level, like this is what's expected in this environment when you're speaking in a business or a native level.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really found it very helpful.
Sure.
How do I put it? I find that if you are at that point where you need to learn Keigo, then yes, it's like one of those things we talked about earlier. You probably should try to do whatever you can to
Mm-hmm.
immerse yourself with it, right? So whether or not you learn it from a textbook, or through searches, or through getting a tutor, or getting someone to really like help you with it, right? Or just one thing I've noticed that can help too is sometimes if you're on LinkedIn and you get messages from, let's say, recruiters or companies that are looking for like special talent or specific skill sets, they contact you in Japanese, and that's kind of where you get some example of how a certain message is crafted from like a very cold call message. So that can get you some exposure to Keigo. But to your question, Zach, I can't speak fully from a textbook of what you learn from a textbook versus what's used, but my would say, do what you can to learn it from a textbook, but know that it probably is different from what you will be exposed to if you work in Japan. And I think that's probably the most effective way to learn it is when you hear people use it and the context of it, right? Because you don't know the certain level of certain things, right? Because I mean, I don't know probably all the details that Noya knows, but I think there's even different words that you say to internally with your colleagues, to your boss, to a potential client, to an ongoing client, right? Like the level of certain words and politeness you use is also very different too, right? And I've been on some calls at work where we're speaking to a vendor who speaks Japanese, and my colleague who can speak multiple languages, she'll just go and start speaking Keigo, and that's when you hear like moshiwakenai, like, or the level of using that type of, not just asumimasen, right? Like they literally apologize. I don't have my business cards on me right now.
All right, so that's where we're gonna wrap things up for this week. Yeah, thank you again, Ernest, for being here for 2 episodes now.
Yeah, great. My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. I mean, this, like I said in the first episode, is my first time doing a podcast, but it was a very nice conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think it transitioned easily and naturally into a second episode where we ended up talking about what it's like living in Japan, the experiences of finding an apartment versus share house, the intricacies or the nuances of the languages.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's like, I mean, that's like the kind of the the goal of our podcast is just to have an interesting conversation that people might not know about otherwise. So yeah, thanks for I guess allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so once again, can you just tell people where to find you?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'm Ernest, Canadian, living in Japan. But on the sides, I have a YouTube channel I do as a hobby where I make videos about my experiences and I document my, or I should say, I document my life experiences living in Japan, and that covers different topics from cultural discoveries, food adventures, travel guides, and most recently, I had made an apartment tour video showcasing what it's like to live in Tokyo and what to expect when it comes to the cost of living and what you can get for rent.
Mhm.
So check me out on YouTube. I'm sure all the links will be added by Noya and Zachary in the details of this episode. Thanks for hearing me out,
Absolutely.
guys. If you guys want to learn more about Japan, or stay tuned for this to the series of the podcast, or come on over to YouTube and follow the adventures there too.
Yeah, so hopefully we can do this again. This was super awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
likewise.
We'll definitely try to. Yeah, I'm sure we could come up with some sort of topic that we could talk about for another 2 hours or something. All right, so yeah, I guess for our podcast, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, you name it, probably on it. Next week, as we said, we're gonna have Naoya talk about his experience in Canada. That one will be in Japanese. So yeah, thank you for listening, and until next week, matane.
またね。
またね。